I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. Today I talked to Jeff Arias. Jeff is a bivocational minister who's preaching the word in Madrid, Spain. Very successful, starting his own business, and now he's devoting himself more full time to the work of the ministry. Find out more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the program.
Rob, thank you for having me. This is really exciting. I appreciate what you do for the
Oh,
disciples.
thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, so happy to have you. I heard your name so many times from different people. I know that you lived in San Diego for a while, and people had talked about this guy, Jeff Arias, who is doing bivocational ministry, which definitely caught my ear because I was like, I'm always interested in bivocational ministers. I did a little bit of it myself, and so I know that there are a lot more, and I think it's growing. I think that kind of a mindset is growing, both in order to advance the gospel, but also for people who are approaching retirement, thinking, okay, what I
Right.
have enough to retire on. What can I do? So I want to look forward to talking to you about that. But let's go back.
Absolutely.
How did you become a Christian?
Yeah. Great question. Great start. I grew up in a Catholic family and I found myself really wanting more, wanting to know truth, and find truth. But I'd gotten to a point in my life, I grew up in Virginia and I had gotten to this place of just not thinking it was Christianity. And I really wanted to know, who God was. And I actually was very puzzled, very early on in this, where you come into a sense of understanding and a place of knowing as a person, one of the first things you realize is, hey, we're all going to die. And,
That's right.
nobody gets out of here alive. So, I almost found it baffling that, as human beings, we weren't all just sitting in small groups every single night and discussing what we found out about what eternity might look like, and so I was that guy that just drove my friends nuts, asking questions and challenging, but I was very certain I wasn't going to be a Christian. And then I had this dream of becoming an Olympic skier. I wanted to, I just like the idea of going very fast, having something that can carry me to the top of a mountain and drop me off, and I can just go as fast as possible down. And so I found, that's what started me praying. I think, like what Paul said, to an unknown God. I just started putting those prayers out there, and before I knew it, I was, again, from Virginia. Here I am standing on a mountain on one of the University of Colorado ski teams, and uh, just looking up to the skies and thinking, wow, maybe there is a God that hears me and is listening. And so as I started with the school at the University of Colorado, Boulder, Colorado is known as the cult capital of the world. They had, like, I think at the time, 240 registered cults, which were, organizations that were recognized as being, cults. So that excited me, actually. So the first day of, orientation school, when they have all the clubs that you can sign up for, I went around and I just signed up for every possible religion I could find, anything that dealt with, the eternal. And, I saw these, the Hare Krishnas on the corner. I thought, well, maybe they found something, maybe we're all missing it. So I was what you would say a really open person, but I was looking. But this is really where I started to reveal himself to me as, it was two disciples that, of all the things I signed up for, it was only disciples that came to my door and followed up with a heart and a conviction to teach and care enough to teach. And so, they invited me out to a Bible talk. I went, and I pretty much, the first Bible talk I went to, I probably talked the whole time, because I had all these ideas and I knew and had really thought about it a lot. But like most of us, these just regular guys just had answers for every challenge I had. And one of the things that did get me, and still to this day, is 40 years ago that I studied the Bible 41, 42 years ago that I studied. When I asked them, I said, "What's this Bible talk?" They said, "Well, we just sit around, we open the Bible, and we just talk about what Jesus said." I thought, wow, that's exactly what I want. I didn't want that, institution of Christianity. I really let's talk about this guy, and they just answered my questions with patience. And so at the same time, I was on this ski team. So every day at school, I would go to class. I'd run home, hit the cafeteria, throw down as much food as I could get in me, then head up to my dorm room, grab all my ski equipment, and then run down to the van that was heading up the mountain. And if you miss it, you miss it. It was not a sport with a coach chasing you down, or at least at my level, nobody was chasing me down. I had to really put in the effort. And this one brother, an African American brother who was reaching out, Byron, he just started meeting me at my door every day, waiting for me. And he just insisted on carrying my ski equipment down to the van. Yeah, and I was like embarrassed, but I was also really blown away at his humility and his willingness. And here I am. I show up at the van and I've got somebody helping me carry my bags. And I was like, please, you don't have to do this. He's like, no, I want to. And then, I'd get back at night and it was on several occasions, he did my laundry for me. And it just, it broke my heart in a way. And but it didn't break it, so when he asked me if I'd be willing to do, 2-on-1 type Bible studies to really learn more, I was at a place like, wow, this guy's already done so much for me. Well, sure, I could do that for you. Of course, yeah, I'll say yes. And and then we sat in the scriptures. We started looking at Jesus, and then, it doesn't take long. You see what Jesus has done for us,
Yeah.
and you have to say yes. You have to, and give my life. That's the least I could do. And so I got baptized in 1986 there at the Boulder Church of Christ, and it was just an amazing, amazing time. I was so grateful. I kind of knew I was onto something when, like I told you, I would just talk with anybody I could. My roommate, at night, I would just have all these ideas and thoughts. And he woke me up in the middle of the night, like at 3 in the morning, and he's sitting there. He's got this blanket wrapped around him, and he said he just had a dream. And I was like, okay, great. I'm here. I am now awake, and he's sitting on the edge of his bed. He said, I dreamt that Satan visited me and told me kill him now. And I thought, maybe we're onto something here. Maybe we are in the right direction. I changed roommates, that's for sure. And
Oh my gosh.
and I was just so, man, Jesus saved my life, from this just despair that I was living of, terror really about life. So, yeah,
Wow. That's amazing. Okay, we were baptized the same year. I was baptized in April of 1986. Jeff, how old are you?
I am 60 years old, just turned 60.
Yeah, I'm 60 also. I turned 60 last September. So we are
Hey,
very close in age. We track pretty closely in terms of our spiritual conversion. That's amazing. Okay, so he switched roommates. He said, I'm going to
yeah.
find somebody else. I don't want someone who's commissioned by Satan to kill me. That was a smart move. Okay, so tell me after that, just what happened. How'd you meet your wife and what's her name?
My wife is Alex Arias, and she's going to kill me. Her Spanish name, she's from Ecuador, is Guillermina, and she moved to the States. Her mom sent her to South Florida when she was 19 years old, didn't speak any English. And I was in Boulder, and the Boston church had started, it was Crossroads at the time, and then it became the Boston movement. We didn't, in Boulder, we had some lines started to get drawn, where, Kip had said in a conference that the Front Range churches were lost. They were dead, I think is what he said. And so the church there started to, kind of circle the wagons. And that's not what I wanted as a Christian. I wanted to continue to learn and grow. And so I ended up moving to Jacksonville, Florida, where I'd heard of a mainline church there that was baptizing over 100, and I just wanted to go and learn. I had left the mountains. I'd given up that dream of being in the Olympics, and then we were there. We were baptized. I was there. Small campus ministry started. We were, baptizing kids in the teen ministry, And then we started getting accused of brainwashing people. And I was like, and we just started talking together. We're like, maybe we should revisit this Boston thing, and what they're doing, and maybe just explore it. So they sent Sam Lang up to this group in Jacksonville, and he preached a sermon uh, to whoever wanted to come, and it was probably about 30 or 40 of us that came and listened to him. And to be honest, it was the first time I ever saw an old person fired up. And Sam was probably not even old at that point. He might have been like 45 or something, but it just inspired me. Like, okay, there's somebody down the road, and that's what I want it to look like for me. And so they encourage who's ever willing is probably best. They were going to plant a church in Jacksonville, but probably best to move down to South Florida, Miami-Dade area. And so I did that. There was a bunch of us. We all, just kind of ragtag jumped and moved down to South Florida. And one of the brothers, friends that had gotten there ahead of me, I went to church, and I was at church, and he comes over to me during service, well, at the end of service, and he says, "Hey, come here. I want you to meet your wife." And I went over, gave one of those side hugs and nice to meet you. And that was kind of it. But then I think it was about 3 months later, her roommate, like my roommate. And so I ended up calling her up and saying, "Hey, you guys want to do a double date?" And we ended up getting married about a year later.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
crazy. That guy was a prophet. Okay, so you moved to Jacksonville, and then were you going to school at the time? Had you already graduated? What year was that? And like, were you doing grad school or something?
I graduated in the spring of '88, University of Colorado, with a BA in psychology. And then I wanted to go in the ministry. I really did. I had looked at actually Pepperdine at the time, and they were willing to give me a bit of a scholarship. But outside of skiing, my other passion was surfing. And I went to Pepperdine. I was like, I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of studying if I go there, you know. And it just it didn't fit at the time. I really wanted to be a part of the growth, a part of, God's moving, his spirit. And and took that detour through Jacksonville on down to South Florida, which then was part of this, Boston movement at the time, Crossroads movement, Boston movement, ICOC, all that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so your initial dream was to do full-time ministry, to be paid as like, a preacher. How'd you get into business? Okay, give us before we kind of drill down, give me the 30,000-foot view of your career from when you graduated in 88 to where you are now. Can you just kind of give me some of the
Absolutely.
rough milestones?
Well, the genius behind me going into the business was me going into the ministry and getting fired.
That'll do it.
Mid-20s, I had no character. I had a lot of growing up to do, a lot of everything that was just in need of change. And so short story, had come out of the ministry, and at that time it was kind of strained between my dad and I. He didn't quite get this. He was a businessman. He very successful in his own right, and he ended up buying this water toy company. His company had been acquired, and so he bought from them this company called Swimways. They make water toys, anything for the beach and the ocean and pools. And he called me and he said, "Hey, I know you're looking for work, but I'm telling you two things. One, I just bought Swimways, and I was familiar with the name." He says, "But the other is I'm calling to tell you I'm not hiring you." He says, "The business can't be charity. I know you're looking for work. Get some experience, and then maybe. But," he says, "if the business does right, can give to charity, but can't be charity." And it was a tough lesson, but it was a good one for my dad. Is I needed to really sort of sharpen up as a human being, and so it was my wife and I. We were living. This was now up in New York. We were living on Staten Island, New York, and a lot of prayer, a lot of humility, valet parking, and telemarketing, and learning what it meant to really put food on a table for a family, and life isn't a party. And then I ended up getting a job with Fisher-Price Toy Company. I had heard that they were hiring on the East Coast, and I called, I sent my resume, and they said, "No, we're not hiring. You don't have enough experience." I was like, "Oh." well, that resume was for that thing. Now this is for this thing. Can I resubmit it? They're like, yep. So I resubmitted it, and they're like, no, we're not hiring. We're not hiring you. Right? Ministry tends to train you for everything, qualify you for nothing.
Well said.
So I feel like I'd learned a lot at this point. Anyway, I'd found out the name and the phone number of the senior vice president for Fisher-Price, who lived on Long Island at the time. And I just called him at home, and his wife answers, and she says, I said, is Mark there? And she says, well, he's getting ready to get on an airplane to go up to East Aurora, where their headquarters was. She says, can I take a message? And I said, yeah. This is Jeff Arias, and I'm the salesperson he's looking for. And and she said, well, I'll tell him, but he's on his way to interview two final candidates with the CEO, and but I'll pass it along. And she asked for a couple other, resumes and all that, and I was actually on a job out in the middle of nowhere with no facts and nothing. But God was, with me on that. And a couple days later, I get a phone call at my house on the answer machine, and Alex and I listened to it, and it was this Vice President Mark, his assistant, who called and said, "Hey, these other two candidates didn't work out. Would you be willing to come in for an interview?" And I went in, and was just, trying to just be my best, take everything. I'd been turned down for so many jobs at that point. It's not even funny. I mean, in fact, there was one job I got turned down for. They had 25 openings, and I still got turned down. I was like, I mean, I took a shower today. And so, but when the right opportunity came, I felt like I was on point. I was ready for it. Not overexcited, not underexcited. Just meeting the moment. And so now all of a sudden I'm at Fisher Price, and so I ended up getting on this fast track with Fisher Price, and I was calling out Walmart, and then my dad and my brother. So my brother was working with my dad. The other part of that conversation, my dad said, "I'm hiring your brother. I'm not hiring you." And he had already had a six-figure job, and he was successful. But so they made me a job offer. They came, and I said no. And he said, I didn't give much of an explanation. I just said no, and then my dad came later. I don't know. I can't remember if it was like a couple months, and he said, "Hey, I want to, make an offer." He brought my mom this time. That was the kicker. "I want to know, I'd like to make an offer, but why did you say no?" And I said, you just really, the heart of it was, I said, you won't understand our lives. And I'm afraid family business, Sunday night, family meals, and I'm at a Bible Talk leaders meeting or something, and, I can't make it. I said, this is our life, and this is who we are. And he said, well, hey, the church in Virginia needs to grow, doesn't it? And he was a good salesman as well. And I was like, I was like, you're right. And so I moved and started in this now family. It was still very small at the time.
Okay, so give me the timeline. Okay, so 88 you graduated, you moved to Jacksonville. When did you move to Fort Lauderdale?
So Fort
And then
Lauderdale would have
into
been
New York.
in 91.
Okay,
Yep.
Fort Lauderdale 91. And then when did you move to New York?
So 92 got married, beginning of 93 moved to New York.
Okay, and
Yeah.
so then when did your dad hire you for the business?
Just towards the end of 97.
Okay. Okay. So
Yeah.
in the 90s, you're building your career. You're really okay, great. So your dad
Yeah.
gets you. You've already been seasoned with a Fortune 500 company. So that's nice.
Yeah. I was actually sitting in meetings now, taking notes, preparing reports for buyers that they were trying to get meetings with,
Did
and
you
I was
ever
like,
land that Walmart contract?
yeah, yeah, yeah. When at that scale, it's not sales anymore. It's product management of not too much, not just enough, that Christmas Eve, 11 o'clock, they sell out their last piece of inventory that you are selling them. If you sold them too much, they want money to mark it down. If you didn't sell them enough, then they're coming back at you because, you didn't forecast correctly. So it starts to become management of, this product line. Fisher Price was huge, and,
Oh, big time.
Christmas time, all that. So yeah, no,
And
I was
this is before
blessed.
Cyber Monday. This is before the internet. And so It's all about
Yeah,
the scramble for Christmas. That's huge. Wow,
it is. In fact, it was, Fisher-Price, Mattel, Hasbro, they do 80 to 85% of their business between Thanksgiving and Christmas for the whole
that's
year.
crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
So you better get it right. If you mess that up, you tank your
yes.
okay.
Yep,
Okay,
you're shooting
so
an arrow
your
over a
dad
wall trying to hit a target. Yep,
your dad hires you. You're working with your brother.
yep, yep. And so we start, and then just 22 years of I was the younger brother. My brother, became the president not too long after I'd gotten there, and then our dad developed Alzheimer's along the way, and so it was really good. I was very fortunate to have a very good working relationship with my brother. Spending that time with my dad, just having a relationship that I had never really had with him before. It was truly wonderful. And then business is about timing, so much about timing, and we really built our business on use with patents. Getting patents around some of the toy items we had, and we could see on the horizon, there was a expiration date for a number of our real hero products, and saw that it was, probably the right time to sell. And we ended up selling to a company called Spin Master. They're the producers of a kids program, Paw Patrol, which is really very popular. And being the younger brother, they didn't acquire us and need two brothers. So my brother stayed on. I ended up getting out with what was a non-compete for the most part at that time. So that was really strange. All of a sudden you step away from something you've been doing for over 20 years, actually with Fisher Price, 25, 26 years, and suddenly you're not only stepping away from it, you're cut off from it almost. That you and So my wife and I, we had been
What year
going.
was that?
Yeah,
When did you get out?
we sold 2017, end of 16,
2017.
2017. Yeah.
So they essentially bought you out, whatever your percentage of the company was. They just purchased that, gave you what the golden parachute, and then you're off
Yeah,
on your own.
exactly.
Okay.
And so my dream and what I always had said was, I wanted to be self-supported someday. And I'd, I'd really come to identify with the character Nehemiah. Nehemiah, you think about it, he was in the citadel of Susa. He's hanging out with the king. He's in uh, royal palace. He's pretty much running the show as really dig into him and his character and who he was. But man, he always had a heart for God. He always had a heart for the people. I mean, that's what comes through those pages. And and yeah, everything was going well, but man, you're never as well if the kingdom's not doing well, and always inquiring and wanting to know, but you're also caught up in a profession that you have to do well. You've got to bring your best. You can't just mail it in. And so suddenly now all this capacity I felt was there. And my wife and I started a Bible talk in San Diego. We had done Bible talks, led Bible talks, all that, but this was a little bit more intentional. In fact, even before I started it, I just every Thursday night I'd sit on the couch and just try to imagine myself like right now, do I have the capacity? I want to sit and watch ESPN, or I want to go out to dinner or whatever, but do I really have the capacity to give and another couple ended up joining. My wife is super dynamic. You should actually get her on a podcast. She is actually, her focus of her doctorate right now is on this missional tension between Sunday and Monday. So
I'm sorry. What did you
anyway, this
say?
was in San Diego. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you
Did
said
you
the tension between. I missed that part about the tension.
the the tension
You're
between
talking about your wife.
Sunday. Yes, yeah, no, not the tension with my wife. That's for another podcast. This is Sunday Christian, and then the Monday professional,
Got it.
and that
Okay.
missional carryover. And what does it look like?
Mhm.
And so she's her doctorate. She's focusing on that right now. So we started this Bible talk, and San Diego's a church with a lot of history, and we ended up with about 50 to 60 disciples in our Bible talk that, a bit displaced maybe, really wanted church, just a place of worship, a place to, and, I don't want to, say about, what that was, except that people just showed up. People came, and it really developed into a wonderful time. And so we worked with the church there in San Diego to where it became a region of the church. Well, we weren't allowed to call ourselves a region, but we were a region of the church. And it was about 60. We started meeting on Sundays. I rented out a elementary school, and we were getting about 100. And then then the scale became, okay, we're full time in the ministry. You to do it right, you have to, yeah, really need to be at staff and be connected and help the church be connected and help, because coming into it the way we did, I felt we had to do the extra work to make sure that it was communicated. We're not trying to split the church. We're not trying to do anything. And so, but after about 3 years, 3.5 years, I was like, whoa, wait a second. We just had this big event, sold the business, and suddenly we're in this full-time ministry work. It was a lot of work. It was wonderful, and the people are amazing. But started praying about the future, and then worked with the church there, and they were willing that we could hire somebody to take our place. We didn't know what it was going to be, but we knew we had to downsize. We were living in La Jolla. It was a little bit, our kids now had graduated, and our youngest was still in the house. So we knew it was kind of a crossroads of sorts. And I started a fast about our future. And the very first morning of the fast, a brother reached out to me and said, "Hey, what do you think about going and leading the church in Madrid?" And I was like, "Wow, that's amazing." It checked every box. My grandparents had immigrated to the US from Spain, from northern Spain.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, and I had never been. And the church in Madrid had been through a lot. They'd been through some splits, they'd been through some pretty intense leaders. And so, you know, we said yes. We decided that, what, I really believe that that's what God was calling us to do, what our next assignment was. Yeah.
Okay, so let me go back a little bit. Did you say your wife is a doctor?
She is now studying to get her doctorate at Fuller University.
Which is a theological school? That's a
Yes.
theology school? Okay, okay, so she's studying
Yep.
for a doctor, but at that time, she was just working in 2017? Just
She had, in her own right, she had, while I was building this water toy company, she started and opened up some yoga studios
got
in
it, okay, so she's
there in Southern
like a
California.
fitness instructor and had
Yep.
her own stores. Okay, so she's not just an
Yeah,
instructor, she owns the business itself. Now,
exactly.
from 2017 till you decided to go to Madrid, what were you doing? Were you retired? Were you just loosely employed? What were you just consulting? What was going on with you in this, secular sphere?
In this, yeah, I ended up buying a patent on a wearable audio device, and, got that manufactured. And, it was really muscle memory. I was just, operating on, oh, that looks like a cool product. Yeah, let's bring that to market, and just, you know, kept at that. And then, I really saw kind of like, what am I doing? The coastal ministry now was really growing. It was really in need of full-time attention. And, you know, I didn't need the money. I didn't need, but it was just, yeah, muscle memory and greed, some greed that was there for sure. Like, oh, I got to make some more money.
Okay, La Jolla, that's my favorite place in continental US. I mean, La Jolla is just, I mean, you just breathe the air, it feels medicinal. It feels like you're
I
getting
know.
healthier
I
just
know.
by breathing the air there. Pam and I during COVID would go there and just hit the beach for like a week, and things were all shut down. Oh my gosh, love that
Yeah.
place. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Okay, so then when did you go to Madrid?
So we officially, talked to our children, and everything finally left in August of 2021. So right towards the back end of the pandemic.
So you've been there for 5 years now.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Five
Can
years.
you tell me what'd you walk into? What was the situation when you showed up, and how's it gone?
Yeah, so our the brother reached out to me was Robert Carrillo. He's, doctorate in his own right, teacher, Spanish speaking world as well, English. And the leadership from Madrid, they had had several splits and some real challenges, but the leaders during COVID had come back to the US. And so the church here was kind of without a leader towards the end of just about a year, maybe. And they had been reaching out to Robert to get just some consulting. And when the leaders had left, went back to the U.S., the group here said, "Hey, we want to hire our own leaders. And we'd prefer, can we get outside help?" Ask, like Robert, and not, it was mission money was coming from, the European Mission Society and from Boston, and so Boston was all yes, absolutely. And so that was Robert's call to me, or text to me, to ask if we would be willing to do this. And because we were self-supported, we could just make these plans and show up. Uh, and so we did. We ended up showing up in August of 2021, and everything was kind of crazy coming out of the pandemic. But they were like, "Yeah, we don't know if we really want you here." In fact, it was kind of like, "We don't want you as a leader here." This American experiment you know, had a lot of history with different faces, so it didn't really matter. They said, "We don't want you to lead, but can you preach?" So I did, and just started with a series on grace. Every Sunday was just about grace, and then did an expository preaching on the Gospel of John, and just, hey, do we all know the same Jesus here? And just non-threatening, just I believe what the gospel is, right? So, and then my wife is fluent in Spanish. I've had to learn from the time I got here. So she was really in there counseling and helping a lot of hurts and past and stuff Satan works in when there's empty space. And after about 6 months, they came and asked us if we would take this role, this leadership role. And we said, "Well, you need to interview us first." And then and we want to interview you too. We had heard a lot of things, but we want to, let's do this right. And so we really had some great heart to heart time. And it's after 2, 3 months later, I can honestly say I don't think we've ever felt more supported and encouraged from a leadership group or working with a leadership group than we have with the group here in Madrid. It was still, challenging. Europe is a different mission field than the US. And
Okay, well, let's talk about that. So how many people were there when you arrived?
on camera, maybe there's 20 cameras on, not even on. you know,
I see. Okay.
there was a good strong core group that was very invested in the church, but y- disciples of Jesus, we were judging, we were just, serving, really. So it was about
Okay. So
30, 20, 25, 20. We were meeting in the park sometimes on Sunday, Zoom. Yeah,
okay, so Spain is a legacy Christian country. I mean, it's just got a deep and rich, I mean, history, Christian history, considered a very hard soil as missionary fields go.
absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah,
we've got Paul talking about wanting to go to Spain in the book of Romans. We're talking way back to the first century.
yeah.
What's been your approach? Like, how do you tackle that mindset wise coming from the US, which is not as hard, much more receptive in many ways? What's been your approach?
It's interesting. I saw a study where they were asking Europeans and Americans, do you consider yourselves spiritual or religious? Americans consider themselves spiritual but not religious in the grand scheme. Europeans consider themselves religious and not spiritual. And I would say that's, Spain with its history, if you wanted to know and, search, and you come here, and what everybody does now would be, go to Google and churches near me. What's going to come up are historical landmarks. And then, what flavor? There's not really much flavor there. The Catholic Church has dominated this for centuries, and most kids have grown up in that system. And so they have a different understanding, a different, whereas in the US, you ask somebody, hey, you want to come to Bible talk? I go to one, or you want to come to church? Oh, I go to church, like, okay, let's talk about it. Here it's just a different mission field. It's a very blanket statement, but it is different. Yeah. And so, one of the things, if I could share then, so now we look at the Iberian Peninsula. After about being here for 3 years, by the grace of God, we were able to get, it was, the church in Barcelona is back on the map, led by a terrific couple. They're Russian and speak Spanish. And they're about 20 now up in Barcelona. And then, sorry, that's my dog. And then you have Madrid, which is really centrally located geographically on the peninsula. This is the Iberian Peninsula, south of France, and then Spain and Portugal is the Iberian Peninsula. Then you got the tip of Africa just 9 miles off the southern tip. Then all the way down south in Cadiz is a town right there called Jerez, in Cadiz, and a disciple couple moved there about 7 years ago. No church, so they just kind of wandered and ended up at this evangelical church and just started serving, but got to a crossroads, a doctrinal crossroads with them, and shared with the pastor. And the pastor said, "Hey, help us become a church of disciples." And so, we ended up studying the Bible with him for a year, and now we're studying with the church. We've been studying with the church. We've had about
Wow.
6 individuals there get baptized, and got a meeting next week. We're just really looking at what this is and how to minister to them and how to help, right? Make them disciples, help them become disciples or be disciples, or just, you know. So we don't know, but it's very exciting. And so that's a
That
group
is
down
very
there,
exciting. That's exciting. Okay, that goes back to the restoration history with Thomas
right?
Campbell and Barton Stone converting whole churches. That is really thrilling. Wow.
Absolutely. And then we just had a kind of a house church open up sort of in Zaragoza. This is the old Roman road, Barcelona through Zaragoza down to Madrid. And so naturally that's north to south running right through the peninsula, and on our hearts and praying. Lisbon is also a jewel, an incredible city. The ICOC had planted there before. Now it's kind of a diaspora of Christians that attend and do, go different places. And but then I just recently had heard of there's a group of 10 disciples from Africa, from Mozambique and Angola, that are meeting together, and they'd essentially been there for about 2 years. And I reached out to them, and they were just so hungry and eager to be connected. Went over, preached to, and now I've been able to line up with some Portuguese speaking disciples to go and encourage. Another empty nester couple that's going to be there actually here in June to encourage them. And we are, so Madrid now in the fall is hosting the Western European Leadership Summit, or the, European Leadership Summit here in the fall. And we hope to get all the leaders now of the peninsula. And we just had our first meeting together on Zoom from Barcelona, Zaragoza, Jerez, Lisbon, and Madrid, all together to pray, share some good news, and just, dream for the peninsula. And
That
so,
is
so
awesome.
back to this, European soil. I would share. I think I've been an infant in my faith for so long, and I'm really understanding and seeing the Spirit of God leading us. That Paul says in 2 Corinthians 3 that we are ministers of a new covenant. It's a covenant of the Spirit, meaning we're not ministering to the law anymore. We're ministers of the Spirit, and truly just seeing. And then those who are led by the Spirit are children of God. Think about that, and just like, as things happen, as they open up, as it's 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 to go and serve what the Spirit is clearly doing in front of us, and to just see where it is now. So we're on the peninsula. We're probably about 140 disciples,
That's
and
amazing. That's amazing.
it's been the Spirit of God. His power is made perfect in our weakness. It's not because of my eloquence of Spanish. And just to see the way, and for a country that's I think men trapped in darkness, to just see the light and see the light open up to them and just it's been just a beautiful thing to be able to serve and be a part of.
That's amazing, Jeff. 140 people. That's really thrilling. And then this group in Portugal. How's your
Yeah.
Portuguese?
Non-existent, I could say.
I guess you preached in English then, I'm assuming.
Yeah, Lisbon is very English friendly.
Okay.
A lot of Portuguese, obviously, but surprisingly, a very large number can immediately switch over to English.
That's nice. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just change subject. It's really exciting. You went there, there's a handful of disciples. There was a certain level of skepticism and mistrust, but you won them over. And now you're starting to pull people together on that peninsula, which is really exciting. You're converting a church. You found a kind of an undiscovered church in Portugal, and then there's this one getting converted in uh, North Africa, which is amazing. I didn't even realize that Spain had these cities or areas in northern Africa, which is really incredible.
So it's still on the Spanish Peninsula, but off the tip of Africa. So there's the Gibraltar and 9 miles of ocean, and then Africa. So this is right there at the tip of southern Spain.
It's on the Iberian Peninsula. Okay.
It is.
But
Yes,
Spain has cities though in North Africa, right? Don't they have a couple cities that they
they
are in
do.
charge of?
Yep, yep.
Okay.
I wish, yeah.
Let me let's kind of go back and talk a little bit about your spiritual journey. I think there's a lot of people listening. I've talked to people over the years that have this dream like I want to be self-supporting, I want to go off payroll, or I want to do ministry, I want to retire early. Okay, you did it. Okay, you're around 50 and you decided, okay, I am going to go for it. Now you had the ability to do it. What advice would you give to people who are thinking about, doing something different, whether at 50 or 60 or 65? Give me kind of the advice you'd give, the pitfalls and the traps.
You know, Great question. It was such a range of emotions. It's interesting. I did a real deep dive into Moses at the time, and just some things just got revealed. It's funny because Moses's first 40 years, he was in Egypt. He thought he was the guy, right? Couldn't everybody see what God was doing? And in fact, that's why he ended up killing the Egyptian because he believed his time had come, and then he runs for 40 years and is non non-existent, and then when God does call, he's like, isn't there a younger guy back in Egypt that could do this? Now that it was his time, and like Nehemiah, I talked about here he is distant, and yet I do think it's about keeping that burning passion that you don't get sucked into the world, because imagine when you do get to that place where you could be self-supported, you've got a lot of other options too. You can justify a lot of other things that you would maybe want to do, which is okay if that's what you believe you should do. But you have to keep that a very clear desire of serving God, of ministering.
Okay, that sounds good in theory, but let's say you've been building your portfolio, things like that. How do you finally just pull the plug and say, I have enough? I mean, it's just so tempting to go, I just need a little bit more. I just need to work another year. And then, you never know what's going to happen. You get a diagnosis that doesn't go well. How do you pull the plug? Any thoughts, any advice on that?
Another one, that's a great question. Jesus talks a lot about greed. Greed, and I love the way Tim Keller he had preached a sermon about it. He said, you notice Jesus didn't talk a lot about, adultery. He said, because when you're in adultery, you know it. You don't wake up and go, oh my gosh, who is this person? What happened? Like you know you're there. But he talked a lot about greed because we don't know we're in it. We get dragged away and enticed. And I've seen it in my life. It's all around always, is just this desire for comfort, this desire for more. We're always looking at, this world now. What is it? Holds up. When I first became a Christian, I remember the brother old guy, Richard Rogers, is at a
Oh yeah.
conference years ago. He said, we used to judge somebody, you know, when they had one car and now they have two cars. Now we judge them when they have two cars and they have a boat, and nowadays it's, they have what, X, Y, Z. They've got so much, like there's always this more, Satan's always,
Yep.
that's not enough. And I think learning how to live, I think where I really started to admire was people that just could live on less and be happy, be content, as Paul says.
Yep.
And also one thing I want to share too, a conviction that I got along the way that was, I believe was very important about shaping me. It just hit me one day. I really asked the question, what if everything Jesus said is true? And I know it's kind of a profound thing to say as a disciple, but meaning, Luke 19, parable of the talents. No, really, he's going to stand in front of you someday and he's going to say, what did you do? And there is a segment, and part of me, it was like, well, I don't know. I was kind of scared to do that. I didn't want to start a Bible dog because I didn't want to appear I was split. I don't want to, and have that. So I just buried it for another day. And, and I really changed, sort of, I think what was a false humility about myself to, hey, I want to be able to point to some things on that day. It's back to Nehemiah. 4 times in the book of Nehemiah, he writes, it's just juicy. He writes, remember me, Lord, for this.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
this is for
Yep.
God. This is,
Absolutely.
and I started to visualize those kind of things of, you know what? That. And I did that. Like, and it's not for here and now, right? It's not it's not for making money. It's not the accolades. It's got to be for God. But I still haven't
That's
answered
right.
your question. So somebody, one is you really understand when is enough. Learn to live with less. It was hard. We had a 7,000 square foot house in La Jolla, and uh, my my wife was driving a 911, and I can't tell you at any one point where it all happened, but it just did. And I've been blessed with somebody I'm equally yoked with. She's is on fire for God and loves the Lord, and we just could see what we believed God was calling us to. And so now for people though, where we are as a church and as a kingdom, I would encourage that if somebody comes to me now, especially in Europe, and they say, "Hey, I want to be in the full-time ministry," my first question then is, "How are you going to pay for it?" Um, and start to break away from that model that we have that, oh, we got a church in that city. Okay, when are we going to be able to afford to pay for somebody full-time to be in that city? No, when are you going to have a heart for that city, willing to work or maybe sell something or, but it's a hard road. It's not an easy road, and start to help our younger generation think that way. Other religions do it well. The Jewish religion does, the Mormons, they take young people and they're set, right? For us, hey, you want to be an attorney? We're like, good luck. If we could mentor more, hey, let's help you to be a great attorney as a disciple, you know, practice this law, stay away from that law. You want to be in real estate, you want to be in medicine, and help give that vision.
Right. So let me just ask you a question. What's helped you to keep the fire burning in the midst of a very aggressive secular career and keep that passion going? Any practices, bullet points, anything a person could take away and go, that could really help me to not get lost in the third soil, not get choked out, but keep my passion for God.
Yeah, another great question. But there's been many times I've been choked. I was getting choked. Back to Nehemiah. He didn't say, I'm confessing their sins. He says, I'm confessing our sins. We've all been a part of this. I mean, there's, many times of just really feeling a bit suffocated because I didn't have the joy of the Lord. I didn't have the closeness with God. I wanted my life to count for something. I didn't want to retire on a golf course. And it's about fighting through those things. What are those encumbrances? And and fasting. I really do believe is obvious, right? God listens to fast. And we just
Absolutely.
strip ourselves down to that basic human element of ourselves and put our wants and our desires before God and ask him
Mhm.
to for his will to be done, right, in our lives, to guide us and show us the right way, help change our hearts where we're not who we should be, to be, at a heart level, a desire level. I used to pray all the time that God change my desires, that my desires are for you, that, because desire leads to the right place. Or the wrong desires can lead to, hell. And so it's really at that heart
I
level and just, yeah,
100% agree with you about fasting. And at a recent conference, I think you were there as well. The big talk was about revival. Join the revival. Lots of talk about revival. I came away going, I'm going to fast, and that's something I totally agree with you. I feel like fasting. I don't know how it works, but I think it just shows. I think it shows God you're serious, that you're willing to forego something that you need desperately to really come to Him. It's not like you feel good doing it. You can live through it, but I go, it makes a difference. So I came away thinking, I'm going to fast. And what I'm doing this at the end of this June is a 3-day fast for revival. And I'm inviting all my listeners and people around the world to join. Let's fast for 3 days. Let's pray for revival in our personal life, in our churches, and churches around the world. So I'm in 100% agreement with you about that.
awesome.
Let me
I
ask you
love it.
one final question, Jeff. I mean, we could go talking on for hours. So interesting listening to you. What advice would you give to a person who wants to make this life count?
Wow. It's back to some of what we've already talked about. Just be where you are. I see younger people that really struggle with this because of this, social media world that we live in where, they feel like at 25 they should be a billionaire already, or they should be running a company, or they, should have whatever it is, millions of followers. And I don't believe that's the path that we're to be on. We're to be on the humble road, the one that surrenders to God, the one that's willing to put God first and foremost each day. And when I shared the story about coming to Spain, it was very interesting because, my heritage, I didn't talk about it a lot. I was almost even a bit embarrassed because I never really connected with Spain. And there's several brothers during the pandemic. We'd get together every Friday and pray. And when I came to him and I said, "Hey, this is what's kind of happened," I was asked to go if we'd go lead and serve the church here in Madrid. And the first thing he said was, "That's your dream." And I thought, God knew it. God, I'd never said I want to go, conquer Spain or anything like that. But man, it's the Lord who did it, not me. And I think find that humble road of peace, of surrender, of gratitude, of willing service, of humility. If I were to do something great in this life, it's only because of God. It's only because of His willingness. Anything I could achieve as a human is going to be forgotten anyway, right? But we know from the scriptures, faith still speaks. Why do we still talk about Abraham? It's because of his faith. We don't know the guy that
That's
lived
right.
across the street from him, right? Because he had no faith, right? But we're still talking about Abraham. And, so any achievement would come from God that's worth remembering anyway. Um, but that comes after, look, many years of chasing and pursuing and searching and grinding, like
Yeah,
trying to make it happen myself, and, just seeing, I'd go back to my younger self and just kind of smack him in the head and say, look, just have faith, be joyful, trust in God, don't worry.
that's right.
He's got you.
Jeff, thanks so much for joining the program. Really appreciate it. All the best to you in Spain.
Love it. Thank you, Rob, for all you do. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thanks for listening to the Rob Skinner podcast. Here's how you can help support the program. First of all, join the Fast for Revival. Let's fast together. Let's go to God. Let's see what God can do in our lives, in our churches, in the world. If we together, not just one person, but Christians around the world decide for 3 days, we're going to fast. We're going to ask God to change our lives, to change our hearts and the people around us. Secondly, read and review one of my books, The 10X Christian. It's exactly what Jeff talked about based on Luke 19. How can we bring Jesus back 10 times what he's given us? Or If you have friends who are struggling or weak in the faith, I just wrote a book called Before You Quit: Letters to a Christian Who Feels Done. And that book is just written to encourage a person who's wavering in their faith, thinking about walking away from the fellowship, thinking about drifting away. And you can just give it to them. It's real simple, real short read, just an encouraging tone to not give up on their faith or on the fellowship. Because my goal is to inspire you to live a no regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and make this life count.